I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
So I've got Amy Koppelman on the podcast. Amy, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. And I want to kind of just set the stage about what incredible things you've done and why you're here and what we're going to talk about. You've written 3 novels. To be honest, I didn't know about the third. You've written I Smile Back, which was just released as a movie with Sara Silverman starring as the main character. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Is that okay?
Yes.
And you also just released Hesitation Wounds. And by the way, we're recording this a few days before the book comes out, but we'll release this when the book comes out. And then, what's this Mouthful of Air? I didn't know about that one.
That's my first novel, A Mouthful of Air. It came out in 2003 on an independent press. It's no longer in business, called Macadam Cage. And it's about a protagonist named Julie Davis who suffers from postpartum depression, although at the time I didn't even know there was a word called postpartum depression. It took so long to get published that by the time it got published, we had a term for it. But I thought it was just more or less a variation on the same theme of depression.
We're going to get into this when we talk about your books, but I feel like with each book, they kind of need to kind of revamp the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So, because it seems like you catalog the different types of depression in your novels, and then of course in the movie. So in the movie I Smile Back, you wrote. It's not like the movie is based on the novel. You wrote the screenplay for the movie also. So
yes, I co-wrote that with Paige Dillon.
So, but first off, I want to mention, you asked right before I hit record, you asked me a question that if you say something stupid, which I doubt you're going to do, but if you say something stupid, would I edit it out? And I told you definitely not. I hope you say something stupid. But
well, I say like all the time. And, and it's very embarrassing to hear those things, but to read them, particularly, like if I read a transcript, I go, oh my gosh, I'm like illiterate.
Well, if I had to read the transcripts of my podcast, I'm sure I would never do another one. But let me tell you, about a week ago, I had a governor on the podcast. It was like the youngest female governor in U.S. history, and I didn't know her name. And literally, I said, you're really hard to research because even when I Googled your name, I couldn't find anything. And I said her name, and she said, "That's not my name."
No.
Yeah, and she said, "This is my name." Well, at least you could edit that out. And I said, no, my readers are going to know exactly how stupid I am.
What is her name? Where is she governor?
Governor Jane Swift. She was governor in the early 2000s in Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. A small state.
Yeah, and she was pregnant with twins, which she had while she was governor.
Wow.
So, and by the way, guess what political party she was in Massachusetts? A female.
Are you going to say she was a Republican?
Well, I sort of give it away there a little bit, but yeah, she was a Republican.
I was like, I think you're leading me on to, you'll be astonished by the surprise of these things. But.
Right. So see, you said a very smart thing on the podcast here. So yeah, she was a Republican, but I don't want to talk about her. I want to talk I want to talk about these books. So Hesitation Moons. So I had an opportunity to read an earlier draft. I Smile Back. I've read. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've seen that the reviews are amazing. Again, Sara Silverman in it, and of course the reviews revolve around how this comedian is able to play such a serious and I don't want to say inspirational. What's the word? She's a serious and it's like very dramatic character. But all of these books seem to catalog a deeper truth, and I want to ask you, kind of as a writer. A lot of times people write memoirs instead of fiction because they think maybe fiction will cloud over a little bit the truth. And Mary Karr just wrote The Art of the Memoir, and a part of her book is about that. But it seems like you do the opposite, where you're able to kind of describe a much more deeper truth by clouding it in not clouding it, but by kind of smoothing it over with fictional characters and scenes. And so these characters, I'll let you talk in a second, but these characters, they're in I Smile Back, she suffers from this deep depression, which has this outlet in kind of her fidelity and her anxiety over passing on her depression to her children. And in Hesitation Wounds, it's kind of the depression is this hole that she has from a deeper loss that she experienced as a childhood loss, and then gradually it becomes full circle. But I want to know about your life. Like, do these books come out of? Do you write them from this inner sense of loss or depression or grief?
I just started writing A Mouthful of Air. I started writing that in 1994. I wasn't thinking, I'm writing a book, and I certainly, when I started realizing I was writing a book, had no idea I was writing a book about a mother who killed her child, because, no one sets out to write that book. But what I do
I'm not so sure nobody sets out to write that book, but...
Well, I surely hadn't known that that's what I was writing. I just started writing on this blue typewriter that I had on a dining room table, and I started writing these letters to this brother of this friend of mine named Marty, who was older, and both of his parents were Holocaust survivors. And I guess we would just write letters back and forth to each other, about something funny that we read about, or a book, or nothing actually really very interesting, but I just started writing, and I guess I felt comfortable writing to him because I guess I just projected onto him that he was, had sadness in him as well. So we faxed these back and forth, and then I just started typing more into it, and that's basically what I do. I just write and write for years and years until I hit a scene, and then I realize, that's what I'm writing to. So then I go back and I look at all the hundreds of thousands of words or hundreds of pages, and the subconscious is an amazing thing because it's all there. I literally sit on the floor with like a scissor and I can cut out a sentence or a paragraph, but if I take them all together, I see the bones of what the story is. So,
but you said you were, and I want to get to I Smile Back and Hesitation Wounds, which were sort of more fresh in the public and in your head. But you said you started writing to him because you sensed or you projected some sadness onto him that he would perhaps relate to your letters. What was the sadness inside of you that was driving this writing?
Oh, because I'm sorry. I guess what I was trying to say from that was that writing for me in early 1994, I fell into a very, very, very bad depression, and when I started getting better is when I started corresponding with Marty, and then I started writing. And so I think what happened for me was that writing became kind of a receptacle for the sadness I felt inside myself. When I was in high school and college, I had very bad bulimia, but I was a very highly functioning bulimic. I mean, I went to good college. I was, the president of every club. But once I moved in with my husband, with Brian, and he loved me so much, and I loved him so much, and I went to go do that. I remember taking the garbage bag, and I just thought, I can't do this to him. Like, I love him. I can't do this. And so when I stopped throwing up and I didn't have that outlet anymore, that's when I actually really began to fall apart. And I guess writing replaced the bulimia, which I guess is a much better way to get the sadness out,
they
healthier way.
They say
yes, I have bad depression, or I had bad depression. I say have because, I mean, even though I haven't had a bad episode in a very long time, I still look over my shoulder every day, waiting to get clobbered by it. But so far, I've been lucky for quite some time now.
Can I ask, like, what was the nature? Because again, all of your stuff is about depression. So this depression must have like cut deep. And what do you think was the nature of it? Was it like purely two questions. One is, do you think fiction or the best fiction comes from when you're writing from a deeper, darker truth that you're not always going to be so comfortable talking about in a nonfiction way?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that. I know why I read or why I go to movies and what I'm looking for. I know for me, Brian gave me Franny and Zoe, and I read that, and I remember there was a line, Salinger's Franny and Zoe, where Zoe said, I'm so tired. And I remember reading that and reading the passage and understanding that she was able to articulate a sense of tiredness that I couldn't, wouldn't have been able to put into words. And over time, what I look for when I'm reading is for somebody to be able to put into words a thought or a feeling that I have, and I might not even be aware that I'm trying to figure out. And then when I read it, I just feel so much less lonely. And so that's what that's not really answering your question, but I don't think writing has to come from a dark place to be good. I don't think writing has to be painful. I think somebody could write a romance novel, and if that really touches somebody and gives them an ability to escape, that's just as much value as somebody who's reading Faulkner. I sincerely believe that. I think all of us, whether we're writers or carpenters or teachers, we just want to be heard and understood. And so for me, it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction or where the person's writing from. If they understand me somehow without even knowing me, and it helps me understand myself better, that's the best kind of writing.
Well, I think a lot of people say that writing does have like a healing factor because you're able to kind of explore these deeper layers of truth underneath yourself, it kind of comes to the top and you're able to think about them and look at them on the page.
Yes, I think that, because of the way I write, I realized the other day something I hadn't really ever thought of before, which was that when I'm writing, and because it takes me so long to write, and because everything I write gets rejected so many times, that when I'm writing, I'm actually not writing thinking about anything other than just what this sounds like so pretentious, but what I'm hearing in my head. And so I guess my writing's the purest part of me, because it's the only time where I'm not worrying about, is the other person okay? As honest and pure as I am with my husband and my children, I'm still worrying about, their well-being or their needs. But when I'm writing, I'm just trying, I guess, to figure out the thoughts and feelings that I don't even know that I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so let's take I Smile Back, for instance. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot, because people should go read it, and your writing is
fine. You can give away the plot. It doesn't matter.
But you know what? Your writing is like really beautiful and amazing, and I want people to read the book. But also, I'll get into a little bit of the plot. Essentially, this main character, Laney, has some sort of depression in her, which she has a hard time identifying, and it maybe comes from kind of loss of her father or things that happens as a childhood. But she basically, to put it bluntly, she can't keep her shit together as a mother and a wife. So she acts out in all these ways, whether it's saying inappropriate things in inappropriate company, or even in terms of fidelity with her husband in various ways. And again, like, where does this come from inside? I'm not obviously saying...
Oh, okay. Well, I'm always the first to say that all the everything that I write is personal, and all the feelings of self-loathing, fear, anxiety, sadness, futility, all of, am I a bad mother? All of those I own. My fears don't manifest in the way that my characters, in the way that it manifests for Laney, as I've been, sleeping with the same guy for 25 years now. For Laney, I really wanted to write a book about somebody who has bipolar illness, who's manic depressive. And so the book, I think you see this kind of more in the book than in the film, tries to follow a manic cycle. So you see her go up and then down. I always look at the different things that she does, whether it's the drinking or the sleeping with random men, as manifestations, as clues to, not as clues, as symptoms to a larger illness.
Okay, so let me ask you
which is the bipolar that she suffers from. And I don't usually say bipolar, because then what happens is, every psychiatrist will say, well, she's more borderline personality, or she's more, but it doesn't really matter. She has a mood disorder that she needs to get under control with medication.
Okay, let me ask you about that. So you mentioned you had heavy depression earlier, and you're always looking over your head for that, but you obviously don't have, or as far as I know, didn't have kind of these other mood disorders, like perhaps the mania or whatever. How does someone like her recognize it in herself, or is it possible? She clearly knows that she's acting out and doing things she doesn't want to do, or things that she knows are wrong. So how does someone recognize that in themselves, or is it possible?
Well, I think that sometimes I don't know if I think I might have read this in there's a woman who writes a lot about bipolar illness, the unquiet mind. I think her name's Kay Redmond Jansfield. Sorry to tell you earlier, I'm terrible with names, but the unquiet mind, and I might have read this in that. But basically, I always feel like depression, you go and you knock over you walk into an apartment and all the books are lined up in alphabetical order, and you knock all the books off the shelves, and then you feel very, very bad about it. And I always think, the bipolar person, when they're in a state of, in a manic state, will knock over all the books and won't feel bad about it until after, which, when they start going into the other side. Those are my layman way of looking at
and
it.
So how did you tap into your layman's view to create such a compelling character? Because I really am following that character and wondering, oh my gosh, what is she going to do next, and how would I respond to it? Like, I got scared reading about that character.
Well, I started writing for a long, long time, like I did with the first book, and then I wrote the scene where she meets a guy in a bar. She goes into a bar looking to meet a guy in a bar, and he bangs her against the wall. And I remember I was at the library writing this, and he smacked her face against the wall, and I remember seeing her smiling, and I thought, oh, she's actually at this moment happy, because for the first time she looks on the outside the way she feels on the inside. And I thought she felt a real relief with that. And then I went back as I did with the first book, and I saw that was there. And then after I see like the bones of the story, or what it is that I'm trying to say, then I start doing research and making sure everything that I write is correct and not wrong. So I read a bunch of books on that. And I think that I was also thinking not as much about the specific illness at times, but I was thinking a lot about what do we inherit from our parents besides hair color and eye color. And what I didn't realize at the time, but I realized after, was that the Laney character is very, very similar to my father, although my father didn't do drugs. But he was somebody that I think so many of us have been touched by people who have some kind of mental illness or mood disorder. Often those people are the most charismatic and the most loving and the most fun to be with when they're up, whether it's up manic or just up not depressed. And then when the darkness comes, I think it's human nature, or to try to think that, well, if you love them enough and you give them enough sense of home, they will get better. And so I guess I was thinking, well, I worked so hard to build this tiny little family that I love so much, and what if beside my father's brown hair and blue eyes, I inherited his need to destroy? And so I think I was writing through the fear of, what if I bust this all up? What if I just inherently can't take it like this, and I just destroy everybody before they have a chance to destroy me? Because I think that Laney is so scared of being hurt and being abandoned by them in one way or another, either that they betray her and leave her somehow, her family, or the best thing that could possibly happen, if you're lucky and you live a long life, is, we die. And so either way, you end up being abandoned and overcome with loss. And so I think that she can't handle that, and she gets so anxious about how much that will hurt her that she preemptively strikes, like I said.
So again, it seems like you've outlined kind of an interesting psychological technique for writing, which is to find through questioning, again, not necessarily darkness. This is not necessarily a truth about you, but some sort of question you have, which leads to a strong vein of fear inside of you that then you deal with a page at a time until it becomes a book.
Yeah, except for that, I never really know what it is until many years after. So I didn't really realize that that's what I Smiled Back was about until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years after, when I had some perspective and I was able to look at it and go, oh, that's what you were trying to figure out. So basically, as I don't know what the right word is, hoity-toity or whatever it sounds, I just rely on my subconscious knowing what I want to say before I even know what it is that I want to say or what even the question is. And
Well,
so far I've been lucky because my subconscious is smarter than me, and I took a lot of classes with Michael Cunningham, the great writer
Sure.
Michael Cunningham, who wrote The Hours, and we took these. My first practice with him where he was teaching continuing education, and I remember this was before he wrote The Hours, and he was saying how by page 70 something you'll realize that everything you thought you were setting out to write, you'll have no idea, but have faith in your subconscious, because what you end up writing will be smarter than what you thought it was you set out to write. And so I always kind of hope, okay, well, hopefully he knows.
Well, it's interesting because in I Smile Back, and again, this is the one that has just come out as a movie with Sara Silverman. In I Smile Back, there is a structure to it. So you kind of get Laney successively worse in her kind of outward inner despair. In the outward expression of her inner despair, she becomes successively worse and worse. And you just described as what was a later scene. That was a pretty intense one, particularly after the scenes that had come before it. But it was just worse and worse. And so there was a structure to it as you were writing it, whether subconscious or not. And then here's the question I have. Why it seems like in the book her husband just blindly puts up with her. And so what was kind of the thinking there in writing that character?
Okay, well, the first thing is I don't mean to say that I don't pay attention after I realize what I'm writing to structure. Of course, then I go back and I spend a lot of time thinking about structure. Or I guess for me the better way to say it is how I can tell the story with the least amount of words. I try to write as economically as possible, and so I do think about all those things. I didn't mean to say like, oh, that just comes out. I just meant the actual story or the feelings in the story or what it means I discover, and then I go back and try to carve out the story. The husband character is a complicated character, and I think in ways he's easier to understand in the film than in the book, because I think, as I was saying earlier, he really, really loves her, and anyone who's loved somebody like Laney or has been loved by somebody like Laney or does the things that Laney does, but when you love somebody like that, he keeps thinking he could make it better, and he keeps thinking, well, if he just brings her to rehab, or if he just loves her more, or if he is just a little more patient, then it'll give her time to, figure out the right medication and get better. And I think that's why at one point, I think what you're talking about is he goes and visits her in rehab, and for Laney, she feels it's very important to tell him these different things that she's been doing. She's sleeping with a friend of his. She's been doing a lot of drugs, and he doesn't want to hear. He almost uses the children as a shield. She tells them to come over and sit with him so that he doesn't have to hear her say the truth, because if you don't say the truth, then there's always the hope that it might not be true. If you don't say the words, then you can kind of tell yourself it's not true. But if Laney really says those things, then he's going to have to address them. And I think he doesn't want to. He just wants it to get better. It's not benign neglect in any way. It's more just what happens, I think, a lot of times when you love somebody like that. I mean, I know no matter how much we loved my dad, my mom and me and my sister and my brother, and how much we tried to fill whatever holes were in him, he, was bound to destroy the people around him for whatever the reasons were. And did your family stay with your dad? No, by the time when I got married, so in my early 20s, my parents finally got divorced, and then my dad was gone for a long time. He was with different women. I mean, he was always a philanderer, but he was the most charismatic and warmest and funny and fun to be with person and sensitive, but then he would have these extraordinarily dark periods. He would do bad things to the family in terms of like either, cheating on my mom or spending money that we didn't have. But we really thought for a very long time that if we just loved him enough and we treated him like how you would treat a thoroughbred horse, if we kept brushing him and feeding him and taking care of him, he'd get better. And I think in terms of Bruce, when you accept that you can't make somebody better, and I think most people can get better, especially now we're so lucky to be alive when there's all these different medications that help people with the more serious mood disorders. But once you have to put an end to that dream and you can't have wishful thinking anymore, it's devastating. In the movie, it was a very low budget movie. It was made for under $400,000, so we only had one read through, and then we went out for a little soup. It was I guess it was cold, and so we had soup. And I remember Josh Charles, who plays Bruce, was saying in the last scene of the movie, Bruce is looking at Laney, and she's in very bad shape, and he's at the top of the stairs, and she's at the bottom of the stairs, and he says, well, what kind of man who really loves their wife wouldn't go down the stairs and help his wife? I just feel bad about not going down the stairs and helping her. And I do think by the end of the movie, when you look at him, you realize, no, he has to let her go. He has to protect his family, his children, and himself. And some people you can't help. They have to really want to help themselves. And if they don't, you have to kind of mitigate what the collateral damage as best you can.
But that's almost like a very rational thing. Like, okay, I've got a scale, and on one end of the scale, someone who's bringing a stem, and on the other end of the scale is my family and children, and so I'm going to weigh the scale and make a decision, as opposed to, I'll just tell you, what my gut reaction would be is I would be in so much incredible pain I wouldn't be able to handle it no matter what the consequences if I were him.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we don't see what happens afterwards, but I mean, he is not going to have an easy time. He loves her, and he loves her from when he was very young and with completely, and he has these kids that are part of her, and he, it's not a rational thing. That's why some people get very annoyed with his character, and they say, well, I mean, how could he stick around when she does all these bad things? I mean, he must know, but it's not rational when you love somebody. When you love somebody completely, it's through thick and thin, and so you want to figure out how to make them better. If it could be rational, that would make it so much easier. If you could write it, if you could divide, take a legal pad, and on the right side write all the pros of, why I like being married to this person, and on the left side the negatives, that would make it. That's why he's a complicated character. But I do think that you, in the end, see why it is that he can't be with her anymore, and she makes a decision for him in many ways.
Right. It's almost like where I Smile Back ends is where kind of other books, like let's say A Million Little Pieces by James Fry, begin, when the person's hit bottom and has to make a change. But it's interesting to see her progression into bottom. But I want to ask you, so A, I want to ask you about hesitation wounds, and B, I want to ask you more about what you said earlier about rejections, and then about technique and about the business of it. So when you're just in terms of routine, obviously you're a great writer. You've written these books. You've written a screenplay that's actually right around the corner for me right now. It's playing at the Angelica Theater. What's your daily process of writing? As naive a question as it is, it's a question I always have on my mind.
I don't have a daily process. I remember once when I first had when I had little kids, I met this writer. She's a very, very good writer, and she told me every day I go into my bedroom at 8:30 and I lock the doors, and even if they're homesick, I just stay in my room and write. And I remember hearing that and thinking, gosh, I don't really have anything that important to say. So my kids and Brian, my husband, they always came first. So because of kind of where I go in my head or the mood it puts me in, if I know that, they're going to, when they were younger, they were going to be home from school at 1, that didn't really give me a lot of time to get into that head and get out of that head. So I don't have a daily process except for when I'm writing. I just try to write and not censor myself. I just write and write and write and write, little bits, big bits. Sometimes I only have time for a couple of paragraphs. Sometimes I have hours that I only get a sentence done. Sometimes I'll get 3 pages done, and I just write. And I just don't look at it again. It's just like I just freehand write, or I write into the computer, and I really don't look at it again till, like I said, years later when I stumble upon a scene, and then I go back and I go, oh, and then I literally, the original definition of literally, like, I do take a highlighter, highlight those sentences, cut them out, and with a scissor and tape them together, and then start over, from page 1. So it's a very sloppy, messy kind of way to do it. But
I never heard of someone rewriting with scissors.
No, I'm sorry. I don't rewrite with the scissors. I put the scissors down, I tape it together, and then I start rewriting on the computer. And so the taped up pieces of paper.
So then you mentioned all the rejections. What does that mean? Like, did you submit this to a bunch of publishers and they all rejected it?
Well, I've always had a lot of rejections. I was rejected from the MFA program at Columbia. I got in on the 3rd time, and I couldn't get at all. I think I said every agent in New York, I think, rejected my first book because it had infanticide in it, and I would get these amazingly nice rejection letters like, this is why we got into publishing, but we won't be able to sell this. And then for I Smile Back, it got rejected by over 80 publishers.
I just want to underline that. It got rejected by 80 publishers, and the movie now is playing around the corner for me.
And the funny thing was is that I had to get a new agent in between A Mouthful of Air. I had finally found this great agent, Amy Renner, in San Francisco, and I had to get a new agent because of different conflict of interest things. And this very high-powered agent said they would be my agent. And I went and I met with her, and she had done like a bunch of very big chick lit books at the time. And I just felt like, why do you want to be my agent? And she said, well, I do books like this, this, and this, so that every so often I can do a book like yours. Actually, she did The Devil Wears Prada. I don't know why I'm worried about protecting her name. I do things like The Devil Wears Prada so that, I can do this. And I said, you sure? Because, my last book got a lot of rejections, and she said yes. And so she took the book on, and I never felt totally comfortable. And my husband was like, well, that's because of your self-esteem. You don't think that, a big shot agent like this would be your agent, but I just didn't feel comfortable. And then for a year, different things went on, and I didn't hear from her, and there were some rejections. I think there were 7 rejections or 12 rejections. And when I finally reached her and got the nerve up to be instead of thinking I'm crazy that she's not writing me back, she said, well, I got married, the book business is dying, and sorry. And so then I had a book, I Smile Back, which had been sent out and rejected 12 times, and no agent. And so I was really stuck in this terrible no man's land because no one wants, a used book that's been rejected. And I was introduced, a while later to my agent now, Andrew Blauner, who's really the most amazing agent. And he read I Smile Back. He knew it had been rejected. He knew it had had an agent before. And he said he understood everything. He wrote me this very long letter, and he understood it. And I remember because Brian and my kids were sitting in the kitchen waiting for when I was going to get to speak to him on the phone, and they were so excited for me that I was finally going to get an agent again. And I walked in and I shrugged my shoulders, and they said, what do you mean? I said, well, he just can't really do it right now because he had so many other books and he just didn't have room for a charity case. So then I kept
Why'd you consider yourself a charity case?
Well, it was going to be very, very hard for him to sell, and he wasn't going to really make any money off of it, and he was working on, I guess at the time, other, hard projects, and so he was at least honest enough to say, like, I get this and I really like this, but I'm not going to be able to do this right now. And I spoke to him and finally he went to collegiate, and there was a collegiate book fair, and I went there, and I basically begged him again, can you be my agent? And he said yes, and then he proceeded to send it to basically every editor. I don't even know if there's this many publishing houses exist anymore. And he would get rejections. I remember one rejection I had from this editor named Star Lawrence. I kept it on our corkboard for years because it said, this too closely mirrors the disappointments in life. And I remember throwing my arms up in the air, even though it was a rejection letter, and going, I did it. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to try to mirror life. And finally, Andrew found this very small independent publisher in Ohio called $2 Radio, Eric and Eliza Obanoff. I think Eric at the time was either a bartender or he was managing a restaurant. He still does something like that. Eliza was doing copy editing. They had a baby, and they paid me $700 or maybe $750 for the book. And they put it out. They weren't scared. And at the end of the day, all you need is one person to say yes. And in fact, Eric was so smart because by the time he got the book, I had tacked on an ending in trying to sell the book. And he said, listen, I feel like that is tacked on. And I said, it is. I only sent it to you because I was trying to get a book deal. And he said, no, that's not right, and he made me take that off. And he also understood. He said, the reason she's having these affairs is because she's anxious. She's not anxious because she's having these affairs. And I thought, I would never have been able to put that into words. And so I was really lucky. They published the book, and they published a couple thousand copies, and I sold a couple thousand copies, and that was that. And
then how did that go from a couple thousand copies to then being made into a movie?
Well, I've still only really sold a couple thousand copies. So the movie so far hasn't really affected my book sales, but because I know that the books are small and not for everybody, in terms of, I think you had said something about the market, I never think about the market. So in those ways, it makes it easier. But what happened was I wasn't thinking about making it into a screenplay. I was driving up the West Side Highway to pick my son up from school, and I heard Sarah on the Howard Stern show. She was talking about her memoir. And
the Bedwetter, by the way, an excellent memoir.
Yes, and I actually heard that interview's on YouTube or on somehow I could hear it, and I thought about listening to it, but then I thought, no, it's better not to hear it again because I don't know precisely what it was that I heard, but it was something in the tone of her voice, the way she was talking about loneliness or sense of aloneness or home or something like that, and I just thought, she's going to understand this, and like I was saying before, in terms of wanting to be understood, that's why I got the book to her, and the miracle was she opened it and read it, and so then we met, and when we were having coffee, I looked at her and I said, if I adopted this, would you be in this, if it were a movie? And she was like, sure, if it doesn't suck, because I remember coming home and saying to Brian, she was just humoring me, she felt bad, so she was like, sure, but she set the bar right where I could, handle it at the if it doesn't suck bar, so I called Paige and I was like, you want to adapt this with me? We just have to make it good enough that it doesn't suck, and so that's how it started.
Amy, despite you're very self-deprecating and it was rejected everywhere, and all of these things you're saying, and yet at the same time you're like a hardcore hustler.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because I look back and I go, how come you didn't quit with all of your insecurities? And I mean, I have more voices in my head saying, you're terrible, this is stupid, this is cliche, and there's not one bad review that I ever get that I haven't already given myself, a million times, which makes me more impervious to them because, the voice telling me how worthless everything I'm doing is, somehow yet there must be part of me that just is like, no, I'm going to keep on trying.
So let me ask about that because, how it seems like in this world you do have to hustle. Like, and it's not like you're going to write a book and suddenly the agents, the producers, the publishers, the stars are all going to shower down love and affection on you. Like, to get something done, you do have to hustle. So what is the technique?
It's funny because this is why I'm so grateful to be on your podcast, because even now I have this new book coming out and I have this movie. And so, one would think that, okay, I'm going to finally be able to get reviews because I've never been a cool networker person. So I never was able to figure out how to get into the New York intelligentsia, cool Brooklyn crowd of people. So I thought, okay, but I mean,
well,
at this
fuck
point,
them. Who cares about that?
So I'm saying at this point, I thought you've had to have written yourself out of obscurity at this point. And meanwhile, I am writing and emailing every blogger, book club person saying, could you read Hesitation Wounds? Can you read Hesitation Wounds? Because you constantly, as a writer, have to beg to be heard and insist upon it. I forget what your original question was, but you just have to keep forcing yourself to do it. The internet has made it much easier because people can't hear my voice shake as much, or the secretary can't stop me where, I have to get through the secretary now. I just have to get through the spam rejector, which can be harder, but I can keep trying. And I tried to learn how to use Twitter about 3 weeks ago to see if I could get any reviews for Hesitation Wounds, and I didn't understand how to use Twitter, and Brian came home that night and he was like, you spammed 100 and something people on Twitter. And I said, well, what does that even mean? He's like, I kept thinking that I was carefully writing people saying, would you think, looking up who people were and asking for reviews, but I didn't realize it was all public. And so everybody saw me asking these other people.
No.
So I'm not great at it, but I just keep trying and,
But I think that's an important thing to note, that no matter what your personal state of fear might be in a situation, with the internet or without the internet, the key thing is to just say, okay, what am I doing today to push my dreams and my projects forward, and then actually do them. So there's a difference between the people who do and the people who don't, and it has nothing to do with fear or shyness or introversion or extroversion. All it has to do with is whether you did it or you didn't do it.
Yeah, and you can make it easy where you can go, okay, well, I'm going to reach out to 2 people today, or I'm going to reach out to 4 people today. And the worst somebody can say to you is no. And no, it doesn't hurt. It can't. I mean, it hurts. It makes you feel, oh, shucks. I wish that they would understand or would want to read. But then if you know that you're going to go on to another person, then it's like, okay, because you only need to get, one person to say yes and believe in you that they will represent you. One person to say yes, that they will put your book out there. And the thing that always keeps me going, because like I said, I don't really sell a lot of books, I collect all the positive things. Like once I remember a couple of years ago, I tried to be in this writing contest, and you needed to be able to show 3 rejection letters. And I don't have any rejection letters because I either delete them or rip them up when they used to come in the mail. And I thought, oh my goodness, no one has more rejection letters than me. But I didn't hold on to any of them to be in this contest because the rejections don't matter.
Doesn't it show you the uselessness of the publishing industry, though? Where like now we can just you could write a novel and you could essentially upload it to Amazon and iBooks and Barnesandnoble.com, and you could publish yourself. Like, heck, I'll give you $700.
I can't. That's the one thing I can't. I need. This can be totally wrong, and I'm not passing judgment on somebody else. I mean, Virginia Woolf self-published, but I can't self-publish. I need somebody to believe in me.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Next book you write. Next book you write after Hesitation Wounds, I will top all of your other prior advances, and I will form a publishing company and publish your book.
Okay. Well, I did get a bigger. I'm on the Overlook Press. This book, Hesitation Wounds, and they actually sometimes they get books in bookstores, and I thought I might actually finally be in a bookstore right when you don't need to be in a bookstore. But maybe I actually will finally be in a bookstore.
Well, that's a good point, though, because so we'll talk about Hesitation Wounds, but even if you get accepted by a publisher, now the bookstore has to accept the book from the publisher, and that often means the publisher has to pay. Most people don't know this, but and you know this probably, but every position of the book in the bookstore is paid for by the publisher. So if I just see the spine as opposed to the cover when I pass the shelf, that means the publisher didn't pay for me to see the cover. Or if I'm on the front, like even the staff picks at Barnes & Noble are all paid for by the publisher. So every position of a book in a bookstore is paid for by the publisher out of their marketing budget for your book. So that's why most books don't make it into the publisher. But let's talk about Hesitation Wounds. So,
but I was just going to say that it's kind of like the supermarket business, because where your product is placed is so much. It depends on the distributor and the power of the distributor, and the same thing goes for reviews, and that's very frustrating. But the great thing about the internet is it makes it much easier to find your people, because there's so many communities of people who, even if the community is 20 people versus 20,000 people, and you can find those people, and then they might tell their friend about you and their friend about you, and then ultimately you'll find your readers. Or if you make a really good tasting jelly and you keep giving it to people, eventually maybe you'll have, a jelly that gets into the bookstore.
But again, the
supermarket. Sorry.
I'm going to get back to the self-publishing thing for a second, because as you said, the publisher is not going to find your online community for you. You're going to find it, and those are the people who are going to buy your books. Those are the people who are going to stand up and say, "Yes, this is a great book." Not the people the publisher finds, because they don't find anyone for you.
Well, I mean, I think that there are amazing editors, and there still are amazing publishers. I think that it's particularly with literature or fiction, I think that there's a real use for the great editors and publishers. I just have never been able to have stuff that people want that they think that they can also sell. Like, I don't actually think it's the publishers or the editors' fault. I think they're in a business that's dying. Fiction is not something that people pay so much. That's like the last thing that people want to do is read. They can watch great things on television. They can go see a movie. And so I think they're just scared. And I'm not as cynical about it, because I understand that, they want to be able to keep publishing things, and they want to maintain their jobs, and so that's fine. Thank goodness that now there's other ways to go about getting an audience. But I do think that there is a good. I think publishers can be a force for good, not just a force for profit.
I believe that, and I also think the kind of validation that they get and the initial working with you. So let me ask you about Hesitation Wounds, because I read an earlier draft. I thought it was excellent. And then
you gave me very good notes.
Yes, because then you wrote me back and said that actually some sections you moved around and changed, and I wanted to understand that process. But first, maybe describe what Hesitation Wounds is about.
Hesitation Wounds is about a woman named Susa Seliger. She's around 45 years old, and she specializes in treatment-resistant psychiatry. And she has there's one patient who, for some reason, she specializes in treatment-resistant psychiatry, which means she's kind of, the last stop on the crazy train. So when the regular psychopharmacologist can't quite, or the psychiatrist can't figure out how to make a patient better through medication, or maybe they need electroconvulsive therapy. They go to this kind of doctor, and so for her, it's safer because she doesn't have to have intimate relationships. There's no talk therapy here, but for some reason, this one patient breaks through, and it forces her to address the death of her brother when she was younger. He had killed himself, and how much, even though it seems like she's living a full life, how much she's never really allowed herself to love and be loved because she was so shattered by his death. And
so again, let me ask you this. Where inside of you did this book exist before you wrote it?
Well, I did realize afterwards, it took me like 9 years to write, as I think I said, and I finished it around a month before my son graduated. I finished like one of the first real drafts before he graduated high school, and I can't not realize that I think that the whole book for me was a process of forgiving myself for getting better and surviving and being happy. And I think I've probably always felt very guilty about that. But also,
can I ask you about that? Because it seems like, so setting aside like massive commercial fiction, which also might, I'm not criticizing massive commercial fiction, like that also might hit deeper truths, but it seems like you have this really great talent at, whether you're conscious of it or not, of really hitting these massively deep, like, truths about yourself that you're working through, and you don't even realize you're working through them as you write until afterwards. I think it's hard for people to kind of dig through the truth. Like, most people are in denial of it most of their lives.
Well, thank God. I'm so envious of people with better denial skills than me. I remember.
I don't know if that's something to be thankful. I don't know if that's something to want, denial skills. I think it's very healing to be able to understand what truth means.
But I remember when my grandmother died, seeing my grandfather, and he was like, well, what does it mean? What does this all mean? And it was the first time, he was 80-something years old, and it was the first time he had recognized, I don't want to say the futility of it all, but it was the first time he was like, well, what does this mean? And I remember thinking, and he was a warm, loving, kind man. He wasn't a shallow man. It's just that he was lucky that part of his mind didn't wander in those directions. So that's what I mean by denial. It'd be good to have a tiny bit thicker skin, or be able to look away a little bit better, because I remember saying this to Brian, and him saying it was crazy, but this is, often things, but I remember saying, by the time you're like 5 years old, or however old you are, when you realize that everyone you love is going to die, it's amazing that every 5-year-old child doesn't just go running into traffic, because it's a horrible thought, as I was saying earlier, when you realize that it all ends in loss. So how do you negotiate with that? How do you allow yourself to be happy when you know that this happiness is going to ultimately end in pain? And so through Sousa, I guess I finally said to myself, well, this is your chance at it. This is your chance to be happy, and you might as well take advantage of it, and it's okay. And as I was writing it, I was taking advantage of it. My kids and Brian, luckily, I've been like a happy, warm, not depressed parent and wife, but inside of myself, I guess, I always, to a certain degree, questioned whether or not I was allowed to, and whether or not I was ultimately strong enough to handle loving everybody to the extent that I love them. Because, it's very scary. You love these people, and you're going to have to say goodbye to them one day. Even just saying that sentence makes me think
But
I
you know,
could start to cry.
So this borders on like two different kind of topics, which is, you know, let's say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, or even existentialism, where we kind of have to question our existence without any evidence of any reason to question our existence. And
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. Yeah.
well, you kind of do that through your books, where you kind of question the meaning of existence without having any basis to hope.
Yeah. When I was in Toronto, I had made it through. We went to Toronto for the Toronto Film Festival, and I had made it through all these interviews, and I didn't cry, and I was really proud of myself. I didn't even know that I hadn't cried until, of course, I started crying. But this one woman came in, and she had the kindest eyes, and she was a reporter, and she told me she was a recovering alcoholic, and she had a son, and she related a lot to the movie. And then she said to me, well, what would you tell Laney? Like, what would you tell somebody like that? Or, you know, what would you tell somebody who struggles to keep it all together? And, of course, I knew she was talking about herself. And I said, I would tell them to hold on to the ice cream cone. And she said, Paige was next to me, and they both looked at me like, what? And I had said this to Brian. I did his podcast. I had said that the way I live my life is I used to be walking with my kids and having an ice cream cone, and I would think, okay, if everything faded to black right now, it's okay, it'd be worth it, because look, here we are having this ice cream cone, and this is enough. And then what I realized as I got better, or allowed myself to accept it a little more, was that I remember sitting at a fountain with Brian and watching them eat ice cream, and we were all eating ice cream, and I just remember, like, no matter what happens, I have to hold on to this, because no matter how sad I ever get, or how discouraged I get, or scared, or anxious, I just need to get back to another moment of having an ice cream cone. So
let me ask you about that. And
my whole existential philosophy is based on Haagen-Dazs. Yeah.
But I like that, because sometimes rather than getting into these big philosophical tangents, it's good to hold on to the ice cream cone. I'm actually going to steal that from you and not give you any credit, but that's okay. But like, what do you do? Like, if someone is, let's say, you know, in all of your books, like Hesitation Wounds or I Smile Back, you have a person who's dealing with this enormous grief that they can't get rid of. Like you even say it in Hesitation Wounds, like you can't, that person, no matter what you do, the other person is dead, no matter what you do. And in I Smile Back, it's not like the other person's dead, but the other person's brain has checked out. Like they have this disorder, and they're not coming back anytime soon. So they're not all there. So what do you do if you're the person who's alive and who's watching it, or who survived? What, you know, you've already kind of said the answer with holding on to the ice cream cone, but what do you do? What does somebody do when they're in that situation?
Well, those are two different situations. The situation of being a depressed person, or being a bipolar person, or whatever, you know, that falls under, my only advice to them is, if you hold on and you keep trying as hard as you can try. I mean, Laney is totally responsible for everything that happens. She has every opportunity to get better, and she doesn't get better, or she doesn't take her medication. I do think that the older I get, the thing that I feel most about depression is the only way you can really get better is by taking your ego completely out of it. I don't know the smart way, like the intellectually smart way to say this, but I remember when I was in my worst place, I wasn't able to make coffee, and I would look at like this green Krebs automatic coffee machine, and I would just think, gosh, maybe one day I'll be able to make coffee. And when I finally did get better enough that I could pour the water into the thing and spoon out the amount of instant coffee and not have to call the deli to get coffee for me and Brian, I remember feeling a huge victory in that. And I think that you need to collect those teeny, teeny, tiny victories and moments of beauty, ice cream cone moments, and eventually, if you have enough faith, those moments and meditation will bring you through to the other side.
And that's very individual. So but what about the people?
But the people that love the person who has this is much more complicated, because you could be married to somebody like me. I mean, well, first of all, different illnesses are different. I mean, somebody who's bipolar, that's much more complicated in many ways than being clinically depressed. It's harder to find the medication, and often those medications have harder side effects to deal with. But the per person basis, I mean, I think that is the struggle for Bruce and I Smile Back. How long do you hold on? How much do you give until you know you can't help that person? And that I don't know the answer to, because for instance, with my father, I loved him no matter what he did, as long as I possibly could, until finally I realized it was going to affect my children. And, after having him come back, and then I realized, no, I have to protect what I worked hard to.
So that was Bruce's example of, what I was describing before metaphorically, where you put everything on the scales and see where it ends up, and you make a rational choice after many, many perhaps irrational choices.
I don't think you can even make a rational choice. I think it just becomes. I don't think it's a rational choice. I think it just becomes a moment of survival. Like it becomes a point where you realize you're not going to survive if you stay with that person. I mean, hopefully for other people it's a rational choice and they don't get to that point. But I know for me, if I had kept trying to have a relationship with my dad, the ways in which he wanted to have a relationship, everything that I had worked hard to protect and build would have been, meaning my little family, would have gotten hurt in the process. So I knew somehow instinctively, much more than intellectually. Afterwards, I can say it now because I have the perspective, but at the time it was just the way in which I had to go to breathe, so it's not so easy to figure out.
Yeah, and so I want to ask one more question, and this is related to I Smile Back, but I want to heavily encourage people to read both I Smile Back and Hesitation Wounds. And I haven't seen the movie yet for I Smile Back, but I am definitely going to see it. But in the Sara Silverman, who obviously plays Laney, we talked about that. She suggested in an interview, she said that too often people in depression skip the meds because they feel they're missing out on the highs and lows. And I wonder, is that I do believe that that's true, but again, that's like almost selfishly not taking into account the people around you. Do you really miss out on the highs and lows on depression medication if you're heavily chronically depressed?
Right. Well, depression medication, I think the highs and lows that she's actually talking about more are when you take lithium, that medication that people take more for the different medications that people take more for bipolar illness. For me, the depression, I didn't miss out on any. I remember it took me a long time to take antidepressant medication, and I thought a lot of those things. I mean, this was a long time ago. I believed a lot of those things. You don't feel anything. You're numb. If you take these kind of medications, you don't want to have sex. You don't want to write. You won't be able to be creative. But the truth was, when I was depressed, it wasn't like I was like, hey, let's fuck, let's write, it wasn't until I was able to feel better that I was able to then enjoy things and taste things and hear things and see things. So for me, I never missed highs and lows. I just wanted to be able to feel again and not be completely numb.
And what about lithium? And I know obviously you're not a doctor talking about this, but you've written about it. So what about the lithium? Does that take away the highs and the lows?
Well, I do think that a lot of times when you have an issue like a mood disorder and you've spent a lot of your time self-medicating, like I can just speak for Laney because that's the only person I really feel like I know inside and out. She knows that certain things are going to immediately make her feel better. She knows if she drinks, that's going to make her feel better. Or she knows if she goes and fucks a random guy, that's going to make her feel better because during that time that she's having sex with him, she's not being overcome with her anxieties. She actually is able to like kind of, be outside of herself. She's so, which I think is another reason why she becomes a very unsympathetic character to people, because women, where we kind of understand, like, oh, a guy goes to Vegas and he fucks some prostitute because, he was having fun with his friends, or he's having an affair with his secretary because, he has a lot of pressure at work, or he's having a midlife crisis. We've all kind of, we don't think it's right, and if it's your friend that it happens to, you go like, oh, so-and-so, what a dick. But, like, but we understand that culturally, where a mother, a woman and a mother to do that, that's something we don't accept. We can't handle a woman, like I said, fucking to escape. And, but Laney knows that makes her feel better. And so I think that for her, that she thinks that feels better than taking the medication. I think the medication doesn't give her the same kind of relief, and it's really selfish that she doesn't take the medication. She comes back from rehab and she goes and she sees her father, and she finally confronts her father for having left when she was a child, and she gets in the car and she just still doesn't have the tools to rely on medication and help, and so she goes and she resorts to what she knows will make her feel better, to drink and to sleep with some guy, and it gives her a momentary break, but it's not going to make her better. It's too bad, because Bruce really loved her, and the one thing I do think in terms of what you're saying is I forgot that I had thought a lot about this, that, we live in this like era where we believe in rehabilitation, and I believe in rehabilitation, obviously, and you can apologize to the people that you hurt along the way and make amends, but the problem is that for Laney, even if her father said he was sorry, or even if my father had said he was sorry, you can't get your childhood back, and I think that's very hard for some people to live with, the rage of what was taken from them.
So, Amy, I just want to again say, thank you for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate it. This has been a long time. I've been wanting you and looking forward to this. And I do really recommend people read I Smile Back, Hesitation Wounds, and I can't wait to see the movie I Smile Back, because not only have I read the book, but Sara Silverman's one of my favorite comedians, and I want to see her as an actress as well. But I also am really upset at you, Amy, because you did not cry on my podcast.
Yes, I did. I started to cry twice. I wiped my nose. I just was good at holding my voice. You got me twice.
All right.
You'll be able to hear it back. You'll hear a quiver, but I was trying to not lose it completely. I hope I made some sense. I'm not an expert on any of these things.
No, you are, and you've written very powerful books, and they have revealed things to me as I was reading them. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That means so much. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And I am sure I will talk to you soon, Amy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.